The glow of multiple monitors illuminated my face as I typed the final lines of code at 2:47 a.m. Another all-nighter in my cramped basement apartment surrounded by empty energy drink cans and takeout containers. To anyone watching through my small ground-level windows, I looked exactly like what my family thought I was, a 30-year-old tech support guy who spent his nights fixing other people's computer problems for $60 an hour. The stereotype of a socially awkward programmer who never quite made it in life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what they couldn't see was the secure server humming quietly in the corner, processing millions of dollars in transactions for Fortune 500 companies. What they couldn't hear was my phone buzzing with notifications from my executive team across 4 time zones. And what they definitely couldn't imagine was that the man they dismissed as their family embarrassment had just closed a deal that would generate more revenue in 1 month than my father would earn in his entire lifetime. 3 years ago, when my father David married Rebecca, I thought I was gaining a supportive family member. Instead, I gained a critic who made it her personal mission to remind everyone, especially during family gatherings, that I was the Thompson who never quite figured life out. She had a talent for disguising her insults as concern, speaking in that syrupy sweet voice that made her cruelty sound almost maternal. Tonight was no different. I had just finished a video conference with my development team in Austin when my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Family dinner Sunday at the summit. Try to dress appropriately this time, Alex. And maybe consider not talking about computers all evening. It makes everyone uncomfortable." The message was followed by a smiling emoji, as if that somehow softened the blow. I stared at the message for a long moment, my jaw clenching involuntarily. The summit was one of Denver's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place where Rebecca loved to hold court and show off her nouveau riche lifestyle. My father's promotion to senior management at Harrison Industries had given her access to a social circle she'd always coveted, and she wielded that status like a weapon against anyone she deemed beneath her standards. What Rebecca didn't know was that I could buy the summit outright without checking my bank balance. What she couldn't fathom was that while she was spending her evenings planning elaborate dinner parties to impress my father's colleagues, I was building something that would make her country club friends' achievements look like lemonade stands. I walked over to my wall safe, hidden behind a poster of the Denver skyline that everyone assumed was just another piece of my Arrested Development decor. Inside, alongside important documents and emergency cash, was a folder I hadn't opened in months. Business Week's preliminary interview notes for their upcoming feature on America's most secretive young billionaires. My publicist had been pushing me to do the interview for over a year, but I'd kept declining. Something about staying under the radar felt safer, more controlled, but maybe it was time for that to change. The story of how I got here began 4 years earlier, when I was still trying to make everyone else happy. I had been working as an actual IT support technician for a small Denver company, making barely enough to cover rent on my studio apartment. It was honest work, but it was also soul-crushing. Every day brought the same problems, the same frustrated customers, the same feeling that I was capable of so much more but didn't know how to break free. My father had been proud of me then, in his own limited way. "At least I had a steady job with benefits," he'd say. "At least I wasn't chasing some impossible dream like those entrepreneur types on television." Rebecca, who was just his girlfriend at the time, would nod along approvingly, already positioning herself as the voice of reason in our family dynamic. But late at night, when the support tickets were finally cleared and I had finished fixing everyone else's technical disasters, I would work on my own projects. I had always been fascinated by workflow automation, the idea that businesses were wasting countless hours on repetitive tasks that could be streamlined with the right software. I started building small programs for local companies, nothing fancy, just tools that could save them time and money. That's when I met Eleanor Martinez. Eleanor was supposed to be just another client, the owner of a mid-sized logistics company who needed help with her inventory management system. But when I arrived at her office that Tuesday morning, I found myself face to face with someone who would change the entire trajectory of my life. Eleanor was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She watched me work for about an hour, asking pointed questions about my approach and methodology. I was used to clients who just wanted their problems fixed quickly and cheaply, but Eleanor seemed genuinely interested in understanding the deeper implications of what I was building. "You're not really an IT support guy, are you?" she said finally, leaning back in her chair with a knowing smile. I looked up from my laptop, confused. "I mean, that's what I do for a living." "That's what you do to pay bills," she corrected. But this, she gestured at my screen, where I had built a custom automation system that was already processing her inventory data faster than her previous software. "This is what you're meant to do." Eleanor spent the next 3 hours showing me her business, explaining the inefficiencies she saw not just in her own operations, but across entire industries. She talked about companies spending millions on software solutions that barely scratched the surface of their actual needs, about entrepreneurs who had great ideas but lacked the technical expertise to execute them properly. "I've been investing in startups for 15 years, she told me as we shared coffee in her office kitchen. "I've seen brilliant business minds fail because they couldn't find the right technical partners, and I've seen incredible programmers waste their talents because they didn't understand the market. But you," she paused, studying my face, "you seem to understand both sides." That conversation planted a seed that would grow into TechFlow Solutions, but the path from idea to execution was anything but smooth. Eleanor offered to be my first investor, but
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
she also made it clear that she expected results, not excuses. She connected me with her network of business contacts, introduced me to other entrepreneurs who had built successful companies from nothing, and most importantly, she taught me to think bigger than I had ever imagined possible. The first year was brutal. I kept my day job while spending every spare moment building TechFlow's core platform, a comprehensive business automation suite that could integrate with existing systems and eliminate redundant processes across entire organizations. I was getting maybe 4 hours of sleep per night, living on caffeine and determination, watching my savings account dwindle as I invested everything into development costs. My family noticed the change, but they interpreted it in the worst possible way. I was always tired, always distracted, always declining invitations to family events because I was working on some computer project. Rebecca, who had moved in with my father by then, started making comments about my priorities, suggesting that I was using technology as an escape from real responsibilities. "Alex needs to focus on advancing his career instead of playing around with these hobby projects," she would say during family dinners, her tone suggesting maternal concern while her eyes held something much colder. "There's nothing wrong with being practical. Not everyone can be Steve Jobs." My brother Kevin, who worked for a respectable financial planning firm, would nod along supportively. He had always been the golden child, following a conventional path that everyone could understand and approve of. My sister Natalie, fresh out of college with her marketing degree, was equally skeptical of my unconventional approach to life. Even my father, who I thought might understand the value of hard work and determination, seemed embarrassed by my apparent lack of progress. He would change the subject whenever Rebecca brought up my situation, but his silence felt like agreement. In their minds, I was a 30-year-old man who was still trying to figure out his life, while everyone else had moved on to adult responsibilities. What they couldn't see was that TechFlow was slowly gaining traction. Eleanor's contacts had led to pilot programs with 3 different companies, each one generating positive results, and word-of-mouth referrals. By the end of my first year, I had 12 active clients, and enough recurring revenue to quit my day job. By the end of year 2, I had hired my first 2 employees and moved operations out of my apartment into a small office downtown. But I kept living in the same basement apartment, driving the same beat-up Honda Civic, wearing the same bargain store clothes. Part of it was practical. I was reinvesting every dollar back into the business, but part of it was strategic. I had learned something valuable about people's expectations and assumptions. When they see what they expect to see, they stop looking deeper. My family's low expectations had become my camouflage. TechFlow's breakthrough came in year 3, when we landed a contract with a major manufacturing company that was struggling with supply chain coordination across multiple facilities. Our automation platform didn't just solve their immediate problems, it revolutionized their entire operational structure. Within 6 months, they had increased efficiency by 40%, while reducing costs by over $2 million annually. Word spread quickly in the business community. Companies started approaching us directly, willing to pay premium rates for custom solutions. Eleanor introduced me to other investors who wanted to fund our expansion. By the end of year 3, TechFlow was valued at $50 million, and I was finally ready to acknowledge that we had built something extraordinary. But acknowledgement and public recognition were two different things. I had gotten comfortable with my secret success, with the freedom that came from operating below everyone's radar. There was something empowering about sitting in family dinners, where Rebecca would make snide comments about my career prospects, while I mentally calculated how much money my company had generated that day. The irony reached its peak 6 months ago. During Rebecca's elaborate birthday celebration, she had rented a private dining room at an upscale restaurant, inviting what she called Denver's most influential families to witness her social ascension. I was seated at the far end of the table, practically hidden from the main conversation, wearing a shirt I had bought 5 years earlier and driving a car that was older than some of the guests' children. Rebecca spent most of the evening regaling everyone with stories about my father's promotion, Kevin's recent engagement to a lawyer, and Natalie's new position at a prestigious marketing agency. When the conversation inevitably turned to me, she adopted that familiar tone of sympathetic concern. "Alex is still figuring things out," she announced to the table, her voice carrying just the right note of family loyalty mixed with gentle disappointment. "He's very talented with computers, of course, but you know how it is with these technical types. Sometimes they get so focused on the details that they miss the bigger picture." I smiled politely and nodded along, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. What Rebecca didn't know was that earlier that day, TechFlow had been approached by a consortium of investors offering to acquire the company for $2.8 billion. What she couldn't imagine was that I had turned down the offer because I wasn't ready to sell yet. The conversation continued around me, with various guests offering well-meaning advice about networking, career development, and the importance of having realistic expectations. I listened to it all with growing amusement, occasionally catching Eleanor's eye from across the table. She was the only person there who knew the truth, and I could see her struggling not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. That night, driving home in my deliberately modest car, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop hiding. Not because I needed their validation or approval, but because I was tired of letting other people write my story. I was tired of watching Rebecca diminish me in front of people who might otherwise be valuable business connections. Most importantly, I was ready to show my father that the son he had written off as a disappointment had actually built something that would outlast anything he had ever accomplished. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, in the form of a phone call from Businessweek's editorial team. They had been tracking TechFlow's growth for months, gathering information for their annual feature on America's most innovative young companies. They wanted to do a comprehensive profile, including a live television interview that would air during their Sunday morning business program. "We're particularly interested in your story," the producer explained during our preliminary conversation. "A young entrepreneur who built a billion-dollar company while staying completely under the radar. Our research indicates that most people in Denver's business community have never even heard of you, despite TechFlow's incredible success. How did you manage to grow so large while maintaining such a low profile? I found myself laughing at the question. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight, I told her. When people expect you to fail, they stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. The interview was scheduled for this coming Sunday morning, the same day as another one of Rebecca's mandatory family gatherings. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. After years of sitting quietly while she crafted narratives about my inadequacies, I would finally have the chance to let the truth speak for itself. But first, I had to get through one more evening of playing the role they had assigned me, one more dinner where I would smile politely while Rebecca explained to everyone why I was the family's cautionary tale, one more night of letting them believe they knew who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The basement apartment felt different now, charged with anticipation for what was coming. I looked around at the deliberately modest furnishings, the second-hand desk where I had built an empire, the narrow windows that had been my only connection to the outside world during those endless coding sessions. Soon I would be able to leave this place behind, not because I was ashamed of where I had started, but because I was finally ready to show everyone where I had ended up. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca, this one reminding me about Sunday's dinner dress code, and suggesting that I might want to prepare some interesting conversation topics that don't involve technology. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back a simple response, looking forward to it. What I didn't tell her was that Sunday's conversation would be more interesting than she could possibly imagine, and that by the end of the evening, everything she thought she knew about me would be permanently shattered. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Denver feel like a postcard. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, deliberately choosing clothes that would meet Rebecca's expectations while knowing they would soon become irrelevant. A button-down shirt from Target, khakis that had seen better days, and shoes that were comfortable but unremarkable. The uniform of someone who had given up on making impressions. My reflection stared back at me, and for a moment I wondered if I was making the right choice. There was something comfortable about anonymity, something safe about being underestimated. But comfort zones, I had learned over the past 4 years, were just elaborate prisons that we built for ourselves. The drive to my father's house in Lakewood took me through neighborhoods where I used to deliver pizzas during college, past the community college where Rebecca constantly suggested I should take some business courses, and finally into the subdivision where success was measured by lawn maintenance and the newness of cars in driveways. My Honda Civic looked appropriately humble parked behind Kevin's BMW and Natalie's leased Mercedes. David answered the door with his usual reserved smile, the kind of greeting that suggested affection tempered by mild disappointment. He had aged well into his 50s, still maintaining the disciplined appearance that had served him throughout his corporate career. His handshake was firm but brief, accompanied by that familiar once-over that always seemed to catalog my shortcomings. "Alex, good to see you," he said, though his tone suggested obligation rather than genuine pleasure. "Rebecca's been looking forward to this all week. She made reservations at the Summit for 6 o'clock. The Summit was Rebecca's favorite restaurant, the kind of establishment where she could display her knowledge of wine pairings and her ability to navigate complex social hierarchies. It was also the place where she felt most comfortable performing her role as the family's social coordinator, the woman who had elevated my father's status simply by agreeing to marry him. Rebecca appeared in the hallway behind my father, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had perfected the art of looking effortlessly elegant, though I knew from overhearing her phone conversations that the effort was considerable and expensive. Her smile was brilliant and calculated, the kind of expression that could convey warmth to observers while somehow remaining cold to its intended recipient. "Alex, sweetheart," she said, moving forward to embrace me in a hug that felt like a performance. "I'm so glad you could make it. Though I do wish you had taken my suggestion about the dress shirt. First impressions matter so much, especially when we're dining somewhere nice." The criticism was delivered with such apparent concern that anyone watching would have seen a caring stepmother offering gentle guidance to her wayward stepson. But I had learned to recognize the patterns in Rebecca's communication, the way she could diminish someone while appearing to support them, the skill with which she could make her targets feel grateful for being insulted. Kevin and Natalie arrived within minutes of each other, their presence filling the house with the kind of animated conversation that came naturally to people whose lives were progressing according to everyone's expectations. Kevin looked every inch the successful financial planner, his suit perfectly tailored and his confidence evident in every gesture. Natalie radiated the controlled enthusiasm of someone who had found her niche in the marketing world, armed with industry terminology and strategic insights that impressed our parents. They both greeted me with genuine affection, but I could see the questions in their eyes, the gentle puzzlement that came from watching a sibling who seemed to be standing still while everyone else moved forward. Kevin clapped me on the shoulder with brotherly concern, while Natalie squeezed my hand a little too tightly, as if she could somehow transfer some of her professional momentum through physical contact. "How's the computer work going?" Kevin asked, his tone carefully neutral. He had learned not to sound condescending, but his word choice betrayed his fundamental misunderstanding of what I actually did for a living. "Keeping busy," I replied, which was technically accurate while being completely inadequate as a description of running a billion-dollar enterprise. Rebecca orchestrated our departure with the precision of a military operation, ensuring that everyone was appropriately dressed and briefed on the evening's social expectations. She had invited another couple to join us, the Hendersons, whom she described as influential members of Denver's business community. James Henderson was a successful real estate developer, while his wife Patricia served on several nonprofit boards and was considered a tastemaker in the city's social circles. The Hendersons were already seated when we arrived at the summit, occupying a prime table with an expansive view of the city skyline. James was a large man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that filled rooms, while Patricia possessed the refined elegance that came from a lifetime of social privilege. They rose to greet us with the practiced warmth of people who understood the importance of making good first impressions. Rebecca handled the introductions with her characteristic flair, presenting each family member as a carefully curated success story. David was the senior manager at Harrison Industries, a position that commanded respect in Denver's manufacturing circles. Kevin was the rising star at his financial planning firm, recently engaged to a prominent attorney. Natalie was the creative force behind several successful marketing campaigns for local businesses. When she reached me, Rebecca's tone shifted almost imperceptibly. "And this is Alex, our family's technology expert. He handles computer support for various local businesses. Very talented, but he's still exploring his options." The phrase "still exploring his options" was Rebecca's elegant way of suggesting that I was professionally adrift, a 30-year-old man who hadn't yet figured out what he wanted to do with his life. James Henderson nodded politely, and shook my hand with the kind of brief firmness that indicated he had already categorized me as someone unworthy of extended attention. Patricia smiled with the practiced kindness of someone who regularly encountered disappointment in social situations. "How interesting," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Technology is such a rapidly changing field. It must be challenging to keep up with all the new developments." The conversation flowed smoothly around topics that excluded me by design. James discussed his latest real estate projects, massive developments that were reshaping Denver's commercial landscape. Patricia described her work with various charitable organizations, dropping names and referencing social events that established her position in the city's philanthropic hierarchy. Rebecca contributed observations about cultural trends and restaurant recommendations, positioning herself as someone whose opinions mattered in refined circles. Kevin and Natalie participated enthusiastically, demonstrating their ability to engage with successful adults as equals. Kevin offered insights about market trends that impressed James, while Natalie described marketing strategies that caught Patricia's attention. They were both clearly comfortable in this environment, natural participants in conversations about achievement and ambition. I listened to it all with growing fascination, not because the topics were particularly interesting, but because of the complex social dynamics playing out around the table. Rebecca was orchestrating the entire evening, carefully directing attention toward family members who reflected positively on her social judgment while subtly minimizing those who didn't. The Hendersons were performing their roles as successful Denver insiders, offering validation and approval to those who met their standards. Meanwhile, I was being systematically erased from the conversation, relegated to the role of family obligation, someone who had to be included but didn't need to be engaged. When James asked what I thought about the city's economic development plans, Rebecca smoothly redirected the question to Kevin, explaining that financial planning gave him better insights into such matters. The meal proceeded through multiple courses, each one accompanied by wine selections that Rebecca had researched in advance. She had become something of an amateur sommelier since marrying my father, developing expertise that allowed her to impress people like the Hendersons while demonstrating her sophistication to restaurant staff. Her knowledge was real and extensive, but it was also performed, another tool in her arsenal of social advancement strategies. As the evening progressed, the conversation inevitably turned to business success stories and entrepreneurial ventures. James regaled the table with accounts of his early struggles in real estate, the risks he had taken and the vision that had enabled him to build his development empire. Patricia shared stories about the nonprofit leaders she admired, people who had transformed charitable organizations through innovative thinking and strategic leadership. Rebecca seized the opportunity to steer the discussion toward contemporary success stories, particularly those involving young entrepreneurs who had built impressive companies from nothing. She had clearly researched the topic in advance, dropping references to tech billionaires and startup founders who had captured national attention through their innovation and business acumen. There's something so inspiring about people who can see opportunities that others miss, she said, her wineglass catching the candlelight as she gestured elegantly. Like that young woman who built the cleaning service empire, or the man who revolutionized food delivery. They started with simple ideas but had the vision to scale them into something extraordinary. James nodded approvingly. Vision and execution, he said. That's what separates the dreamers from the achievers. Anyone can have ideas, but it takes real business sense to turn those ideas into profitable enterprises. Patricia leaned forward with interest. I read an article recently about hidden entrepreneurs, people who build successful companies while maintaining deliberately low profiles. Apparently, there are quite a few billionaires who operate completely under the radar, avoiding publicity while focusing entirely on growing their businesses. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here I sat, listening to people discuss the exact phenomenon that described my own situation, while being treated as someone incapable of understanding such sophisticated concepts. Rebecca's expression suggested that she found the topic fascinating but also somewhat theoretical, like discussing exotic animals that existed in distant parts of the world. That takes incredible discipline, Kevin observed. Most people who achieve that level of success want recognition for their accomplishments. It must be rare to find someone who prioritizes privacy over publicity. Natalie contributed her perspective from the marketing world. From a branding standpoint, it's actually quite brilliant, she said. When you avoid the spotlight, you maintain complete control over your narrative. No media scrutiny, no pressure to conform to public expectations. You can focus entirely on business fundamentals without worrying about perception management. David had remained relatively quiet throughout the evening, but now he offered his own thoughts on the subject. It's an interesting strategy, he said, but I wonder if it's sustainable long-term. Eventually, success becomes impossible to hide, companies grow too large, impact becomes too significant. Someone always notices when you're changing the game, even if you don't want attention. Rebecca smiled indulgently at her husband's observation. David's always been practical about these things, she explained to the Hendersons. His experience in manufacturing has taught him that real achievement requires visibility and accountability. You can't hide from responsibility when you're managing significant operations. The conversation continued to circle around themes of entrepreneurship and business success, with everyone contributing observations about what it took to build meaningful enterprises. James talked about the importance of reputation and community connections. Patricia emphasized the value of strategic networking and social capital. Rebecca highlighted the role of family support and personal stability in enabling professional achievement. Throughout it all, I remained largely invisible, occasionally asked for my opinion on technical matters, but otherwise treated as a passive observer to discussions about real achievement and meaningful success. The assumption seemed to be that while I might understand computers, I lacked the broader perspective necessary to contribute insights about business strategy or entrepreneurial vision. What they couldn't know was that every topic they discussed was something I dealt with on a daily basis. When James talked about managing large-scale projects with multiple stakeholders, he was describing challenges that were routine elements of my work with Fortune 500 clients. When Patricia mentioned the complexity of organizational leadership and strategic decision-making, she was referencing skills that I had developed through building and managing TechFlow's expanding operations. The evening reached its crescendo when James began discussing his relationship with his biggest client, Harrison Industries, my father's employer. He described the manufacturing company in glowing terms, praising their leadership and operational efficiency. David beamed with pride at hearing his workplace receive such recognition from someone of James's stature. Michael Harrison is one of Denver's most respected business leaders, James continued. His company has grown tremendously over the past decade, and he's always looking for innovative ways to improve their operations. In fact, he mentioned recently that they're exploring new technology solutions to streamline their supply chain management. Rebecca's eyes lit up with opportunity. David, you should mention Alex's computer expertise to Mr. Harrison. Maybe there's some project where his technical skills could be useful. The suggestion was delivered with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she was doing me an enormous favor, creating an opportunity for me to finally contribute something meaningful to the family's success. David looked uncomfortable with the idea, clearly reluctant to risk his professional reputation by recommending his underachieving son for any significant responsibilities. I'm not sure Alex's experience matches what they're looking for, he said carefully. Harrison Industries works with major technology firms for their serious projects. They need proven track records and established capabilities. The statement hung in the air like a verdict, a gentle but definitive dismissal of my potential contribution to any meaningful business endeavor. Rebecca nodded understandingly, her expression suggesting that she had expected this response but felt obligated to make the suggestion anyway. James Henderson's phone buzzed during the dessert course, and he glanced at it with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple priorities simultaneously. His expression shifted slightly as he read whatever message had appeared on his screen, his eyebrows rising in apparent surprise. Interesting, he murmured, showing the phone to Patricia. Michael Harrison just sent me an article about some technology company that's been making waves in the automation space. Apparently, they've been working with major manufacturers across the country, helping them revolutionize their operational efficiency. Patricia leaned over to examine the screen, her interest clearly piqued. TechFlow Solutions, she read aloud. I've never heard of them, but according to this article, they're valued at nearly $3 billion. The CEO is supposed to be interviewed on television this weekend. My heart rate accelerated as I realized what was happening. Businessweek had published their preliminary article about TechFlow earlier than expected, probably to generate interest in tomorrow morning's live television interview. The timing was perfect and terrible simultaneously, creating an opportunity I hadn't anticipated while potentially disrupting the careful choreography I had planned for the evening's revelation. Rebecca's attention was immediately captured by the discussion of a multi-billion-dollar company, especially one that apparently operated in the technology sector. $3 billion, she repeated, her voice carrying a note of awe that suggested she was trying to comprehend such an enormous figure. And they specialize in business automation. That's exactly the kind of innovation that separates successful companies from their competitors. Kevin leaned forward with professional interest. I'd love to know more about their financial structure, he said. Companies that achieve that level of valuation usually have remarkable revenue streams and growth projections. Their investors must be incredibly satisfied with the returns. Natalie's marketing instincts were similarly engaged. The fact that they've maintained such a low profile while achieving massive success is brilliant brand strategy, she observed. They've built tremendous value without the overhead costs and complications that come with public attention. When they finally decide to raise their profile, the impact will be enormous. James was still reading from his phone, his expression growing more impressed as he absorbed additional details about TechFlow's operations and achievements. According to this, their CEO is some young entrepreneur who started the company just 4 years ago. The article calls him one of America's most secretive billionaires. The word billionaire seemed to electrify the entire table, generating the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for celebrity sightings or natural phenomena. Rebecca's eyes were wide with fascination, while David looked genuinely amazed that such success could emerge from relative obscurity in such a short time frame. 4 years, David repeated, clearly trying to process the timeline. That's incredible growth for any industry, but especially for technology. The planning and execution required to scale that rapidly must have been extraordinary. Patricia nodded in agreement, and the discipline to avoid publicity while building something so significant. Most entrepreneurs at that level become public figures almost automatically. The fact that this person has maintained privacy while achieving such success suggests remarkable focus and strategic thinking. Rebecca turned to me with sudden enthusiasm, as if she had just remembered my presence and realized its potential relevance to the conversation. Alex, you work in technology. Have you heard of this TechFlow company? Do you know anything about their automation solutions? The question hung in the air with loaded significance, creating a moment that could change everything or nothing, depending on how I chose to respond. I could feel the weight of their collective attention, the expectation that I might finally contribute something valuable to the evening's discussion. I took a sip of wine, buying myself a few seconds to consider my options. The television interview was scheduled for tomorrow morning, less than 12 hours away. In a matter of minutes, my carefully maintained anonymity would be permanently shattered, regardless of what I said or didn't say tonight. I'm familiar with their work, I said carefully, which was perhaps the most accurate statement I had made all evening. James looked at me with renewed interest, apparently surprised that the family's underachieving technology worker might possess relevant knowledge about a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. What's your assessment of their approach? Do you think their automation solutions represent genuine innovation, or are they just marketing existing technologies more effectively? The question was more sophisticated than I had expected from someone outside the technology industry, suggesting that James understood enough about business fundamentals to recognize the difference between real innovation and clever packaging. His expression indicated genuine curiosity about my perspective, the first time all evening that anyone had seemed interested in my professional opinion. I found myself at a crossroads that I hadn't anticipated. I could provide a generic response that would satisfy their curiosity while maintaining my cover, or I could offer insights that might reveal more than I was ready to disclose. The safe choice would be to deflect with technical jargon and vague observations about industry trends. Instead, I decided to provide real value, to demonstrate expertise that might surprise them while stopping short of complete revelation. TechFlow's approach is fundamentally different from most automation companies, I said, my voice carrying the confidence that came from intimate knowledge of the subject. Instead of trying to replace existing systems, they build integration layers that allow companies to optimize their current investments while adding new capabilities. The table fell silent as everyone processed this unexpectedly sophisticated analysis. Rebecca looked genuinely surprised, as if she had never heard me speak with such authority about any professional topic. David's expression suggested he was reevaluating his assumptions about my technical knowledge and business understanding. Kevin leaned forward with interest. That's a smart strategy, he said. Companies are often reluctant to abandon systems they've already invested in, even when those systems are inefficient. If TechFlow can improve performance without requiring complete replacement, they eliminate most of the barriers to adoption. Natalie nodded enthusiastically. And from a marketing perspective, it's much easier to sell enhancement than replacement. Companies can justify automation investments when they're building on existing infrastructure rather than starting from scratch. James Henderson was studying me with the kind of focused attention he had previously reserved for Kevin and Natalie, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time all evening. "You seem to understand their business model quite well," he observed. "Have you worked with similar automation technologies in your own projects?" The question was dangerous territory, inviting me to reveal information that could unravel my carefully maintained cover story. But it also represented an opportunity to establish credibility that might prove useful regardless of what happened with tomorrow's television interview. "I've implemented comparable solutions for several clients," I said, which was technically true while being completely inadequate as a description of my actual relationship with TechFlow's technology platform. Rebecca's expression had shifted from surprise to something approaching pride, as if she was discovering unexpected value in a family member she had previously written off as unremarkable. "Alex, I had no idea you were working on such sophisticated projects. Why haven't you mentioned any of this before?" The question revealed the fundamental disconnect between Rebecca's perception of my work and the reality of what I had been building over the past 4 years. In her mind, I was still the guy who fixed computer problems and installed software updates, not someone capable of engaging with cutting-edge business automation technologies. "Most of my clients prefer confidentiality," I replied, which was perhaps the most honest statement I had made all evening. "Technology projects can involve sensitive business information, so discretion is usually part of the service." David looked at me with what might have been the first genuine respect he had shown all evening. "That's good business practice," he said. "Companies like Harrison Industries are always concerned about protecting proprietary information when they're working with outside technology consultants." James Henderson's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it with the automatic response of someone who couldn't afford to ignore potential business communications. This time, his expression shifted to something approaching excitement as he read whatever message had appeared on his screen. "This is remarkable timing," he announced to the table. "Michael Harrison just texted me about the TechFlow article. Apparently, he's been trying to connect with their CEO for months, hoping to explore potential partnerships. He's particularly interested in their supply chain automation capabilities." The conversation had taken a turn that I couldn't have orchestrated if I had been trying, creating perfect setup for tomorrow morning's revelation while generating genuine business interest from exactly the right person. Michael Harrison, my father's boss and one of Denver's most respected manufacturing executives, was actively seeking to work with TechFlow Solutions. Rebecca practically glowed with the social implications of this development. "David, this could be a wonderful opportunity for you to make valuable connections at work. If Mr. Harrison is interested in this company, demonstrating knowledge about their capabilities could really enhance your standing." David nodded thoughtfully, clearly recognizing the potential career benefits of being able to contribute insights about a technology company that had captured his CEO's attention. "Alex, would you be willing to share some of your observations about TechFlow's automation approach? I'd like to be prepared if Mr. Harrison brings up the topic." The request was delivered with more respect and consideration than my father had shown me in years, suggesting that my unexpected demonstration of professional knowledge had genuinely impressed him. For the first time all evening, he was treating me as someone whose expertise might prove valuable rather than someone whose presence had to be tolerated. I found myself in the surreal position of being asked to brief my family about my own company's capabilities, to help my father impress his boss by demonstrating knowledge about technologies that I had personally developed. The irony was so perfect that I had to suppress the urge to laugh out loud. "I'd be happy to help," I said, which was perhaps the most understated response I had ever given to any question in my entire life. The drive home from the summit felt different somehow, charged with an energy that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in recent memory, my family had looked at me with something approaching respect rather than barely disguised disappointment. The conversation had shifted when I demonstrated actual knowledge about TechFlow's business model, transforming me from invisible family obligation into someone whose insights might prove valuable. But I knew this newfound respect was fragile, built on assumptions that would crumble the moment they discovered the full truth. Rebecca's enthusiasm about my technical expertise would evaporate when she realized that I wasn't just familiar with billion-dollar automation companies, I was the person who had built one. David's interest in leveraging my knowledge to impress his boss would transform into something much more complicated when he learned that his boss was desperately trying to meet with his supposedly underachieving son. I spent the remainder of the evening in my basement apartment, reviewing the final preparations for tomorrow morning's Business Week interview. My publicist had sent over the confirmed schedule and technical requirements for the live television broadcast, along with a detailed briefing about the questions I could expect and the key messages they wanted me to emphasize during the segment. The interview was scheduled to begin at 8 o'clock sharp, broadcast live from Business Week's Denver studio. The format would include a pre-recorded segment showcasing TechFlow's offices and operations, followed by a 15-minute live conversation with their senior business correspondent. The entire piece was designed to introduce me to a national audience as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs, someone who had built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise while maintaining complete anonymity. What made the timing particularly perfect was Rebecca's habit of hosting elaborate Sunday brunches for the family, gatherings that she used to reinforce social hierarchies and distribute approval or criticism based on recent performances. Tomorrow's brunch was scheduled to begin at 9:30, exactly 90 minutes after my television interview concluded. The logistics couldn't have been more ideal if I had orchestrated them myself. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the irreversible step I was preparing to take. For 4 years I had operated in the shadows, building something extraordinary while allowing everyone to believe I was ordinary. Tomorrow would end that careful balance forever, transforming me from Denver's most secretive billionaire into someone whose success could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of October day that made Colorado famous for its stunning natural beauty. I selected my wardrobe carefully for the television interview, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without ostentation, paired with a crisp white shirt and understated tie. The goal was to look successful, but not flashy, confident but not arrogant, approachable but not ordinary. The Business Week studio was located in downtown Denver's financial district, occupying several floors of a gleaming tower that housed most of the city's major media operations. I arrived 45 minutes early, partly to ensure I wouldn't encounter any unexpected delays, but mostly because I wanted time to acclimate myself to the environment before going live on national television. The production team was impressively professional, guiding me through makeup and lighting adjustments while briefing me about camera angles and interview logistics. The correspondent, Janet Morrison, was a seasoned business journalist whose reputation for insightful questioning had earned her access to some of America's most successful and elusive executives. Janet and I spent 20 minutes in pre-interview conversation, discussing the key themes she intended to explore and ensuring that I was comfortable with the format and timing. She was particularly interested in the story behind TechFlow's remarkable growth trajectory, the strategic decisions that had enabled such rapid scaling, and my reasons for maintaining such a low public profile despite achieving extraordinary success. "What I find most fascinating about your story," Janet explained as we prepared for the live broadcast, "is how you've managed to build a multi-billion-dollar enterprise while remaining completely unknown outside of very specific business circles. Most entrepreneurs at your level become public figures almost automatically, but you've deliberately chosen anonymity. That suggests either remarkable discipline or very specific strategic thinking." I found myself appreciating her directness and the sophistication of her analysis. "Anonymity creates freedom," I replied. When people don't know who you are, they can't form expectations about what you should or shouldn't do. You can focus entirely on building value without worrying about managing perceptions or satisfying external pressures. Janet nodded thoughtfully, but anonymity also has costs. You miss opportunities for networking, partnership development, public recognition that might attract top talent or strategic investors. How do you weigh those trade-offs when you're growing a company that now operates across multiple continents? The question revealed the depth of her preparation and understanding of the business challenges involved in scaling technology enterprises. The key is being selective about visibility, I explained. You can build the relationships and partnerships you need without becoming a public figure. Success doesn't require publicity, it just requires results. At precisely 8 o'clock, the cameras began rolling for the live broadcast. Janet's introduction was comprehensive and compelling, positioning TechFlow as one of America's most significant business success stories while emphasizing the mystery surrounding its founder and CEO. The pre-recorded segment showcased our Denver headquarters, interviews with key employees, and testimonials from major clients who praised our automation solutions. Then came the moment I had been anticipating and dreading simultaneously. Janet turned to me with the kind of focused attention that signaled the beginning of serious questioning, her expression conveying both professional curiosity and personal interest in understanding what had driven my unconventional approach to building a business empire. Alex Thompson, you're 30 years old, you've built a company valued at nearly $3 billion, and until this morning, most people had never heard your name. That's an unusual combination in today's business environment, where success typically generates immediate public attention. What made you choose anonymity over recognition? The question was delivered with perfect timing and emphasis, creating a moment that would define how millions of viewers understood my story and motivations. I took a breath and committed to the path I had chosen, knowing that everything would be different when the interview concluded. I grew up in a family where success was measured by external validation rather than internal satisfaction. I began, choosing my words carefully to provide context, without revealing too much personal information. I watched people pursue recognition instead of achievement, and I decided early in my career that I wanted to reverse those priorities. Building something meaningful was more important than getting credit for building it. Janet leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly engaged by this perspective. But surely there comes a point where hiding success becomes counterproductive. TechFlow now employs over 300 people across 6 different cities. You're working with Fortune 500 companies. You're generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue. How do you maintain anonymity at that scale? The answer required me to explain strategic decisions that most people would find difficult to understand, choices that prioritized long-term value creation over short-term recognition. Scale doesn't require publicity, I replied. Our clients care about results, not celebrity. Our employees care about working on challenging projects with competitive compensation, not about having a famous boss. Investors care about returns, not about photo opportunities. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, covering topics ranging from TechFlow's innovative automation technologies to my predictions about the future of business process optimization. Janet's questions were consistently intelligent and probing, requiring me to articulate complex strategic concepts in language that would be accessible to a general audience. The concluding segment was particularly powerful, featuring client testimonials and employee interviews that demonstrated TechFlow's impact across multiple industries. A manufacturing executive explained how our automation solutions had reduced their operational costs by 30% while improving quality metrics. A logistics company CEO described how our integration platform had eliminated bottlenecks that had plagued their supply chain for years. As the interview concluded, Janet delivered a closing statement that perfectly captured the significance of what had just been revealed to a national audience. Alex Thompson represents a new generation of entrepreneurs who prioritize substance over style, results over recognition. TechFlow Solutions may be one of America's most valuable private companies, but until today, its founder was one of our most anonymous billionaires. That changes now, as the business world discovers what a select group of Fortune 500 companies have known for years. Sometimes the most powerful innovations come from the most unexpected places. The cameras stopped rolling at 8:16, leaving me with exactly 74 minutes before I was expected to arrive at Rebecca's Sunday brunch. The timing was so perfect that it felt almost surreal, as if the universe had aligned itself to create maximum dramatic impact for the moment when my family would discover who I really was. I drove through Denver's quiet Sunday morning streets, passing joggers and dog walkers who were enjoying the crisp autumn air, completely unaware that their city's most secretive billionaire had just revealed himself to millions of viewers across the country. The contrast between the peaceful normalcy of the morning and the magnitude of what had just occurred created a sense of unreality, as if I was experiencing someone else's life rather than my own. Rebecca's house in Lakewood was already bustling with activity when I arrived at exactly 9:30, my timing calculated to ensure that I wouldn't miss any of the reactions to the morning's broadcast. The familiar sounds of Sunday brunch preparation filled the air, mixing with animated conversation from family members who seemed unusually energetic for a quiet weekend morning. I could hear Rebecca's voice from the kitchen, directing food preparation with her characteristic attention to detail, while David's deeper tones suggested he was discussing something business-related with Kevin in the living room. Natalie's laugh carried from the dining room, where she was probably arranging flowers or adjusting table settings according to Rebecca's exacting standards. The scene was so perfectly normal, so completely unchanged from hundreds of previous family gatherings, that I almost wondered if the television interview had actually happened or if I had somehow imagined the entire experience. But my phone was already buzzing with notifications from business contacts and media outlets, confirming that the broadcast had indeed aired and was generating exactly the kind of attention we had anticipated. Rebecca greeted me at the door with her usual enthusiasm, though her expression suggested she was still processing yesterday evening's revelation about my technical expertise. "Alex, perfect timing as always," she said, though her tone indicated that punctuality was one of my few reliable virtues. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about that TechFlow company. David mentioned it to several people at work, and apparently everyone is talking about them this morning." The statement created an interesting dynamic, suggesting that my family had spent their morning discussing my company without realizing they were discussing my company. The irony was so perfect that I had to concentrate on maintaining a neutral expression while Rebecca continued her enthusiastic commentary. "James Henderson called this morning to thank us for such an interesting evening," she continued, clearly pleased with the social success of last night's dinner. "He said his conversation with you about automation technologies was the most insightful analysis he's heard from anyone outside the industry. He even asked if you might be available to consult on some of his development projects." This was an unexpected development that added another layer of complexity to the morning's revelations. James Henderson, one of Denver's most successful real estate developers, was apparently interested in working with me based on the expertise I had demonstrated during our dinner conversation. The fact that he was now actively seeking to hire me for consulting work would make the morning's revelations even more dramatic. We moved into the living room, where David and Kevin were engaged in animated discussion about business trends and market opportunities. Their conversation had clearly been influenced by yesterday's encounter with the Hendersons and the subsequent discovery of TechFlow's impressive valuation and industry impact. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," David was saying as we entered the room. "Michael Harrison has been looking for technology partners who can help streamline Harrison Industries' supply chain operations, and now we've identified exactly the kind of company that could provide those solutions." Kevin nodded enthusiastically. "And Alex's insights about their business model could be incredibly valuable for positioning any potential partnership. His analysis of their integration approach was more sophisticated than anything I've heard from our technology consultants." The conversation was developing in directions that would make the morning's revelations even more impactful than I had originally anticipated. Not only had my family spent their morning discussing my company, they were actively strategizing about how to leverage my supposed expertise to create business opportunities that they didn't realize I already controlled. Natalie joined us from the dining room, carrying a tablet that she had been using to research additional information about TechFlow and other successful technology companies. Her marketing background had clearly motivated her to investigate the industry trends and competitive landscape that surrounded the automation solutions market. I've been reading everything I can find about TechFlow solutions, she announced, settling into a comfortable chair with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for client projects. Their growth trajectory is absolutely remarkable, but what's even more impressive is how they've managed to maintain such strong relationships with major clients while avoiding any negative publicity or public relations problems. Rebecca looked up from the coffee service she was arranging with characteristic precision. What kind of publicity problems do technology companies usually face? Natalie consulted her tablet before responding. Usually it's either leadership controversies, product failures, or competitive disputes that generate negative media attention, but TechFlow seems to have avoided all of those issues, probably because their CEO has maintained such a low profile. There are hardly any public statements, no social media presence, very few interviews or speaking engagements. David leaned forward with interest. That's smart business strategy. When you're working with major corporations on sensitive projects, the last thing you want is a CEO who generates controversy or unwanted attention. Kevin contributed his perspective from the financial services industry, and it probably helps with client retention too. Companies are more likely to share confidential information with service providers who demonstrate discretion and professionalism rather than self-promotion. The analysis was becoming increasingly sophisticated, with each family member contributing insights that demonstrated genuine understanding of the strategic decisions that had shaped TechFlow's development over the past 4 years. What they couldn't know was that they were essentially conducting a detailed review of my business philosophy and management approach while I sat quietly listening to their conclusions. Rebecca had been unusually quiet during this discussion, but now she looked up from her coffee preparation with an expression that suggested she was processing something significant. "You know what's interesting," she said slowly. "The more I think about last night's conversation, the more impressed I am with Alex's knowledge about this industry. His explanation of TechFlow's integration approach was more detailed and insightful than anything I've read in the business press." The observation created a moment of focused attention on me that felt both gratifying and dangerous. For years, Rebecca had dismissed my technical work as insignificant, but now she was publicly acknowledging expertise that had surprised and impressed her. The shift in her perspective was exactly what I had hoped to achieve, but it was happening faster than I had anticipated. David nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking the same thing. Alex clearly understands these automation technologies much better than I realized. His analysis could be valuable for anyone trying to evaluate potential partnerships with companies like TechFlow." Kevin looked at me with renewed respect. "Have you considered expanding beyond individual consulting projects? With your knowledge of automation solutions, you could probably build a successful practice helping companies evaluate and implement new technologies." The suggestion was delivered with genuine enthusiasm and brotherly support, suggesting that Kevin was beginning to see possibilities for my career that he hadn't previously considered. The fact that he was encouraging me to pursue exactly the kind of business that I had already built created another perfect layer of irony for the morning's revelations. Natalie looked up from her tablet with sudden excitement. "Speaking of TechFlow, their CEO is supposed to be interviewed on Business Week this morning. The article I read said it's his first major television appearance, and it's airing live at 8 o'clock. Rebecca immediately brightened with interest. "What time is it now?" she asked, reaching for her phone to check the schedule. 9:45, David replied, consulting his watch with the precision of someone who managed his Sunday mornings according to carefully planned schedules. "Oh no, we missed it," Natalie said with obvious disappointment. "I would have loved to see what he looks like, and hear how he explains TechFlow's success story." Kevin pulled out his phone and began searching for online coverage of the interview. Maybe they've already posted clips or highlights. Business Week usually makes their content available digitally pretty quickly. Rebecca was clearly frustrated by the missed opportunity. "We should have known about this earlier. If we're going to stay current with business trends and networking opportunities, we need to be more aware of these kinds of media events." The conversation was developing exactly as I had hoped, creating perfect setup for the revelation that was about to transform their understanding of everything they thought they knew about me. They were actively seeking information about the interview they had missed, motivated by genuine interest in learning more about a company and CEO that had captured their imagination. David was already moving toward the living room television, reaching for the remote control with the kind of determined efficiency that characterized his approach to problem solving. "Let me see if they're running any repeat coverage or analysis segments," he said. Business Week often provides follow-up commentary after major interviews. Rebecca joined him at the television, adjusting her position to get a clear view of the screen while maintaining her role as the morning's hostess. This could be exactly the kind of information that helps us understand current market trends and business opportunities. Kevin and Natalie gathered around the television as well, creating an impromptu viewing party focused on discovering more information about the interview they had missed. Their enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, transforming the casual Sunday brunch into an active investigation of Denver's most mysterious business success story. I remained seated slightly apart from the group, watching their animated preparation with a mixture of anticipation and amusement. They had no idea they were about to discover that the person they had been discussing with such admiration and curiosity was sitting quietly in Rebecca's living room, wearing clothes from Target and driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic. David found a business news channel that was running extended coverage of the morning's most significant interviews and market developments. The timing was perfect, as Business Week had apparently provided their footage to other networks for broader distribution, ensuring that the interview would reach the widest possible audience. "Here we go," David announced, settling into his favorite chair with the remote control positioned for easy access. "They're showing highlights from this morning's Business Week interview with TechFlow's CEO. Rebecca immediately focused her attention on the screen, her expression conveying the kind of intense interest she usually reserved for social events or cultural performances that might enhance her status and sophistication. "I can't wait to see what this mysterious billionaire actually looks like." Natalie had her tablet ready to take notes, approaching the viewing experience with the same analytical mindset she brought to her marketing research projects. "I want to pay attention to his communication style and messaging strategy." Successful CEOs usually have very specific approaches to public presentation. Kevin was positioned to get a clear view while maintaining access to his phone, clearly planning to research additional information about anything that caught his attention during the broadcast. His financial background had trained him to look for details that might reveal insights about business strategy and market positioning. The television screen filled with the Business Week logo and opening graphics for their signature Sunday morning interview program. Janet Morrison's professional introduction began playing, her voice carrying the authority and gravitas that had made her one of America's most respected business journalists. "This morning we bring you an exclusive interview with one of America's most secretive young entrepreneurs," Janet's voice announced as the opening credits continued. "Alex Thompson, founder and CEO of TechFlow Solutions, has built a multi-billion-dollar automation company while maintaining complete anonymity. Today, for the first time, he tells his remarkable story." The camera transitioned to show Janet sitting across from her interview subject, and suddenly my face filled the television screen in Rebecca's living room. The reaction was immediate and electric, with 4 distinct expressions of shock and disbelief transforming the previously animated family gathering into a moment of stunned silence. Rebecca's coffee cup slipped from her hand, clattering against the hardwood floor and sending hot liquid splashing across her carefully arranged morning setup. David's mouth fell open in an expression of complete bewilderment, while Kevin's phone slipped from his grasp and landed on the couch beside him. Natalie's tablet remained frozen in her hands as she stared at the television screen with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for traffic accidents or natural disasters. "That's Alex," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible above the television audio. "That's our Alex." David reached for the remote control and increased the volume, as if hearing the interview more clearly might somehow change what they were seeing on the screen. My voice filled the room, explaining TechFlow's business model and strategic approach with the kind of authority and expertise that completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about my capabilities and achievements. The interview continued for several more minutes, with each question and answer providing additional evidence that the family's underachieving technology worker was actually one of Denver's most successful business leaders. The pre-recorded segments showcasing TechFlow's offices and operations were particularly powerful, demonstrating the scale and sophistication of the company that I had built while living in a basement apartment and driving a car older than some of my employees. When the interview concluded and the program moved on to other business news, the living room remained silent for what felt like several minutes. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and confusion that suggested she was struggling to process what she had just witnessed. "Alex," she said slowly, turning to look at me with an expression that combined respect, bewilderment, and something that might have been embarrassment. "You're the CEO of TechFlow Solutions." The statement hung in the air like a question, as if she was hoping I might somehow explain that there had been a mistake, that the person on television was someone else who happened to share my name and physical appearance. But my expression must have confirmed what they had all just seen, because her face gradually shifted from confusion to a kind of shocked recognition. David was staring at me with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for complex work projects or important business decisions. "You built a $3 billion company," he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder that suggested he was having difficulty accepting this new reality. Kevin had retrieved his phone and was frantically searching for additional information about TechFlow and its valuation, as if independent verification might help him process what he had just learned about his brother. "Alex, this is incredible. According to these articles, you're worth over $2 billion. Natalie was still holding her tablet, but her attention was completely focused on me rather than her research materials. "How long have you been running TechFlow?" she asked. "When did all this happen?" The questions were coming rapidly, driven by a combination of curiosity and shock that was understandable given the magnitude of what they had just discovered. 4 years of assumptions and expectations had been permanently shattered in the span of a 15-minute television interview, transforming their understanding of me from family disappointment to business phenomenon. I looked around the room at their expectant faces, realizing that this was the moment I had been building toward for months. Everything that came next would depend on how I chose to handle their questions and reactions, how I decided to explain the choices that had led me to build a fortune while letting them believe I was struggling to pay rent. "I started TechFlow 4 years ago," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence that had settled over the room like a heavy blanket. "Everything you just saw on television is real." The silence that followed my confirmation stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds. Rebecca remained frozen in place, staring at me as if I had suddenly transformed into someone she had never met. Coffee continued to drip from her overturned cup, creating a dark stain on the hardwood floor that would serve as a permanent reminder of this moment. David was the first to move, reaching for his phone with hands that trembled slightly as he began searching for additional information about TechFlow Solutions. His corporate background had trained him to verify facts before accepting extraordinary claims, even when those claims came from his own son, accompanied by video evidence broadcast on national television. 4 years, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been building this company for 4 years, and we had no idea." Kevin had found his voice and was scrolling through article after article about TechFlow's valuation and market impact. "Alex, these financial projections are incredible. You're generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue. How did you keep this secret for so long?" Natalie seemed to be the quickest to process the implications of what they had discovered. Her marketing background had given her insights into brand management and public relations, helping her understand how someone could deliberately maintain a low profile while building a successful enterprise. "The basement apartment," she said suddenly, her eyes widening with understanding. "The old car, the thrift store clothes. You've been hiding in plain sight, letting us think you were struggling while you were actually building an empire." Rebecca finally found her voice, though it carried a quality I had never heard before, a mixture of awe and something that might have been shame. "Alex, I don't understand. Why would you let us believe you were barely getting by? Why didn't you tell us what you were really accomplishing?" The question went to the heart of everything that had driven my decision to maintain secrecy for so many years. How could I explain that their constant dismissal and condescension had made it easier to build something extraordinary than to fight for their belief in my potential? How could I articulate the freedom that came from operating without their expectations and limitations? Because you never asked what I was building, I said quietly, you only saw what you expected to see. David looked up from his phone with an expression that combined confusion and hurt. We're your family, Alex. Of course we care about what you're doing with your life. We've always wanted you to succeed. The statement revealed the fundamental disconnect between their perception of support and the reality of how their attitudes had affected me over the years. They genuinely believed they had been encouraging and supportive, while I had experienced their interactions as constant reminders of my perceived inadequacy. You wanted me to succeed according to your definition of success, I replied. Traditional career path, conventional achievements, recognizable status markers. When I chose a different approach, you interpreted it as failure rather than innovation. Rebecca had moved to clean up the spilled coffee, but her movements were distracted and mechanical, as if she was performing the actions without conscious thought. But Alex, you were living in a basement apartment, driving that old car, wearing clothes that looked like you shopped at thrift stores. What were we supposed to think? The question highlighted the assumptions and judgments that had shaped their understanding of my situation for years. They had equated external appearances with internal reality, using surface-level observations to draw conclusions about my capabilities and achievements. You were supposed to think that maybe appearances don't tell the whole story, I said. That maybe someone could choose to live modestly while building something extraordinary. That maybe success doesn't require expensive cars and designer clothes. Kevin was still processing the financial implications of TechFlow's valuation and growth trajectory. Alex, according to these articles, you're worth more than all of us combined. You could buy anything you want, live anywhere you choose. Why stay in that basement apartment? The question revealed how difficult it was for them to understand motivations that didn't center around material display and social status. In their world, wealth was something to be demonstrated through possessions and lifestyle choices, not something to be accumulated quietly while maintaining a deliberately modest public presence. Because I didn't build TechFlow to buy things, I explained. I built it to solve problems, to create value, to prove that innovation doesn't require publicity. The money was never the point, it was just a measurement of impact. Natalie had been quiet during this exchange, apparently processing not just the revelation about my business success, but the broader implications for how our family dynamics had developed over the years. Her analytical mindset was working through the complex social and emotional factors that had enabled such a significant secret to persist for so long. We treated you like you were the family failure, she said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of genuine remorse. All those dinners where Rebecca would make comments about your career prospects, where Dad would suggest you needed to be more practical. You were sitting there knowing you had already achieved more than any of us, and we were lecturing you about success. The acknowledgement was both validating and painful, confirming experiences that I had tried to rationalize or minimize over the years. Hearing Natalie articulate the pattern of dismissal and condescension made it impossible to pretend that my family's treatment hadn't affected me or influenced my decision to maintain secrecy. Rebecca had abandoned her coffee cleanup efforts and was sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at me with an expression that seemed to combine several different emotions simultaneously. Alex, I owe you an apology. I've been treating you like you were lost, like you needed guidance and direction, when you were actually building something incredible. The apology was unexpected and appreciated, though it couldn't undo years of subtle undermining and social embarrassment. Rebecca's intentions had never been malicious, but her need to position herself as the family's social coordinator had required someone to serve as a cautionary example, and I had filled that role perfectly. I accept your apology, I said, meaning it genuinely while recognizing that rebuilding trust and respect would take time and consistent effort from everyone involved. David had been unusually quiet during this emotional processing, apparently struggling with his own feelings about the revelation and its implications for our relationship. As someone who had built his identity around being the family's primary breadwinner and most successful member, discovering that his supposedly underachieving son had vastly exceeded his own accomplishments was clearly challenging to process. "I'm proud of you, Alex," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the words were difficult but sincere. "What you've built with TechFlow is extraordinary. I just wish I had understood what you were working toward instead of assuming you were drifting without direction." The statement represented more acknowledgement and respect than he had shown me in years, suggesting that the morning's revelations had genuinely shifted his perspective on my capabilities and achievements. But it also highlighted how much our relationship had been damaged by years of misunderstanding and dismissal. "Thank you," I replied. "That means a lot coming from you." Kevin was still absorbed in his research about TechFlow's business model and competitive position, his financial background driving him to understand the mechanisms that had enabled such rapid growth and impressive valuation. "Alex, I'm reading about your client base, and some of these companies are major players in manufacturing, logistics, and technology services. How did you gain access to decision makers at that level?" The question revealed his assumption that business development required extensive networking and relationship building through conventional channels. In his experience with financial services, success came through building trust with clients over extended periods, gradually expanding relationships through referrals and reputation management. "Results create access," I explained. "When you can demonstrate measurable value, decision makers pay attention regardless of your age or background." I started with smaller projects for mid-sized companies, proved that our solutions worked, and used those successes to gain credibility with larger organizations. Natalie looked up from her tablet with sudden understanding. "Eleanor Martinez," she said. "I saw her name mentioned in several articles about TechFlow's early development. She was your mentor, wasn't she?" The recognition demonstrated how thoroughly she had been researching TechFlow's history and the people who had contributed to its growth. Eleanor had indeed been crucial to my success, providing not just initial investment, but also strategic guidance and valuable connections that had accelerated our expansion. "Eleanor saw potential that no one else recognized," I confirmed. "She taught me to think bigger than I had ever imagined possible, and she introduced me to people who could help make that vision reality." Rebecca's expression shifted as she processed this information. "So while we were treating you like you needed our advice and guidance, you actually had mentors and advisors who understood your real potential." The observation captured another layer of irony in the situation. While my family had been offering unsolicited counsel about career development and practical choices, I had been working with experienced business leaders who recognized and nurtured capabilities that my own relatives had dismissed. "Eleanor understood that innovation often comes from unexpected sources," I said. "She didn't care about my background or conventional credentials, she cared about results and potential impact." David had been processing the broader implications of TechFlow's success for his own career prospects at Harrison Industries. "Alex, your company is exactly the kind of technology partner that Michael Harrison has been seeking. He's been trying to identify automation solutions that could improve our supply chain efficiency." The statement created an opportunity that I had been anticipating since James Henderson mentioned Harrison Industries' interest in TechFlow's capabilities. My father's boss had been actively seeking to connect with my company, not knowing that the solution to his technology needs was sitting in his employee's living room every Sunday. "Michael Harrison contacted us 3 months ago," I revealed, watching David's expression shift to amazement. "We've been in preliminary discussions about potential partnership opportunities." Kevin looked up from his phone with sudden excitement. "Dad, do you realize what this means? Alex could be your company's technology partner. You could be working on projects together." The possibility had clearly captured everyone's imagination, transforming the morning's revelations from personal family drama into potential business opportunity. But it also created complex dynamics that would require careful navigation to avoid conflicts of interest or awkward power imbalances. "Any business relationship would have to be handled carefully," I said. "Professional partnerships work best when they're based on mutual value rather than family connections." Rebecca had been quiet during this discussion, apparently still processing the magnitude of what she had discovered about the family member she had consistently underestimated. Alex, I have so many questions about how you managed to build all this while we remained completely unaware. The request opened the door to deeper conversation about the choices and strategies that had enabled my success while maintaining secrecy. But it also represented an opportunity to help them understand motivations and priorities that had seemed incomprehensible when viewed through conventional frameworks. What would you like to know? I asked, genuinely curious about which aspects of my story they found most difficult to understand or accept. Natalie was the first to respond, her marketing background driving her to focus on strategic communication and brand management issues. How did you handle the psychological pressure of maintaining such a significant secret? Most people who achieve major success want recognition and validation from the people closest to them. The question touched on one of the most challenging aspects of my decision to maintain anonymity. There had been moments when I desperately wanted to share my achievements with family members, times when their dismissive comments had made me want to reveal the truth just to see their reactions. Recognition from people who don't understand your values isn't actually validating, I explained. I knew that if I told you about TechFlow's success, you would focus on the money and status rather than the innovation and impact. I didn't want your approval for the wrong reasons. David leaned forward with genuine curiosity, but surely there were times when you wanted to defend yourself, to correct our misconceptions about what you were accomplishing. The observation was accurate, highlighting moments when maintaining secrecy had required considerable self-discipline and emotional resilience. Family gatherings had sometimes felt like endurance tests, requiring me to smile politely while listening to advice about career development from people who had no idea what I was actually building. Every family dinner was a test of that decision, I admitted. But I knew that revealing the truth prematurely would change our relationships in ways that might not be positive. I wanted to build something so undeniable that it would speak for itself. Rebecca looked genuinely remorseful as she processed the implications of how she had treated me during those family gatherings. Alex, I'm horrified thinking about all the times I made comments about your career prospects or suggested you needed more direction. You were listening to that while knowing you had already built something extraordinary. The acknowledgement was both painful and therapeutic, validating experiences that I had tried to rationalize or dismiss over the years. Hearing Rebecca recognize the impact of her words made it possible to begin processing the emotional costs of maintaining my secret while enduring constant subtle criticism. I understood that you were trying to be helpful according to your own definition of success, I said. But it was difficult to listen to advice about achievement from people who had no idea what I was actually achieving. Kevin had shifted his focus from TechFlow's financial metrics to the broader implications of my success for family dynamics and relationships. Alex, this changes everything about how we see you and how we understand our own accomplishments. You've redefined what success looks like in our family. The observation highlighted one of the most significant long-term consequences of the morning's revelations. My business success didn't diminish their own achievements, but it did provide a new perspective on risk-taking, innovation, and unconventional approaches to career development. Success isn't competitive, I replied. I've built doesn't make your achievements less meaningful, it just demonstrates that there are multiple paths to creating value and impact. Natalie was still processing the strategic brilliance of my decision to maintain anonymity while building TechFlow. From a public relations standpoint, what you've accomplished is remarkable. You've controlled your narrative completely, avoiding all the negative attention and scrutiny that usually accompanies rapid business growth. The analysis revealed her professional appreciation for the communication strategy that had enabled TechFlow's development without generating unwanted publicity or competitive attention. Most technology entrepreneurs become public figures almost automatically, but I had deliberately chosen a different approach. Anonymity creates freedom to focus on what matters, I explained. When you're not worried about public perception or media coverage, you can make decisions based entirely on business fundamentals and long-term value creation. David had been contemplating the practical implications of TechFlow's success for our family's financial dynamics and future planning. Alex, your success changes everything about our family's economic situation and planning considerations. Have you thought about how this might affect our relationships and interactions going forward? The question addressed concerns that had been developing in my mind for months as TechFlow's valuation continued to grow. Significant wealth disparities within families could create complex social dynamics, potentially generating resentment, expectation, or awkwardness that might damage relationships that were already complicated. Money doesn't have to change our relationships if we don't let it, I said. I'm still the same person who was sitting at Rebecca's dinner table last night, listening to advice about career development. The only difference is that now you know what I've been building during those 4 years. Rebecca looked at me with an expression that combined admiration and regret. But Alex, you're not the same person we thought we knew. You're someone who built a multi-billion-dollar company while living in a basement apartment and letting us treat you like you were struggling. That takes incredible strength and discipline. The acknowledgement represented a fundamental shift in her perception of my character and capabilities. For years, she had seen me as someone who needed guidance and direction, but now she was recognizing qualities like strategic thinking and emotional resilience that had enabled extraordinary achievement. I'm exactly the same person, I insisted. You just didn't know what I was capable of because you never looked closely enough to find out. Kevin had been following the conversation while continuing to research TechFlow's competitive position and market impact. Alex, I keep reading about how your automation solutions are revolutionizing entire industries. Companies are achieving efficiency improvements and cost reductions that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The observation highlighted the broader significance of TechFlow's work beyond personal financial success or family dynamics. We had indeed developed technologies that were transforming how businesses approached operational optimization, creating value that extended far beyond our own company's profits. That's what makes all the secrecy and sacrifice worthwhile, I explained. When you can help companies become more efficient, more profitable, more competitive, you're creating value that benefits employees, customers, shareholders, and entire communities. Natalie was scrolling through media coverage of the morning's Business Week interview, tracking how various outlets were reporting the story and analyzing the public response to TechFlow's sudden emergence from anonymity. Alex, you're trending on social media, and the business press is calling this one of the most significant entrepreneur reveals in recent years. The information confirmed that my decision to end the secrecy had generated exactly the kind of attention and interest that we had anticipated. After 4 years of operating below the radar, TechFlow was suddenly one of America's most talked about business success stories. The publicity will bring opportunities and challenges, I acknowledged. We'll have to manage increased attention while staying focused on serving our clients and continuing to innovate. David had been quiet during this exchange, apparently processing the full magnitude of what the morning's revelations meant for his understanding of his son and his own role as a father. Alex, I owe you an apology for not recognizing what you were building. I should have asked more questions, shown more interest in your projects, tried to understand what you were working toward. The apology was meaningful because it acknowledged not just misunderstanding about my business activities but broader failures in our relationship that had made it easier for me to maintain secrecy than to seek his support and encouragement. You saw what you expected to see, I replied. Most people do, but family relationships should be different. Family members should look deeper, ask better questions, show more curiosity about each other's dreams and ambitions. Rebecca had been listening to this conversation with increasing emotional intensity, clearly recognizing her own role in creating dynamics that had made secrecy seem preferable to honesty. Alex, can you forgive us for not seeing you clearly? For treating you like you were lost when you were actually building something incredible? The question went to the heart of what would be required for our family relationships to move forward in a healthy direction. Forgiveness was certainly possible, but it would need to be accompanied by genuine changes in how we understood and treated each other. Of course I can forgive you, I said. But forgiveness isn't the same thing as forgetting. Moving forward, I need to know that you see me as someone capable of making good decisions and achieving meaningful success, even when my approach doesn't match conventional expectations. Kevin looked around the room at the faces of family members who were all processing complex emotions about the morning's revelations. This feels like a new beginning for all of us. Alex, your success gives us permission to think bigger about our own goals and possibilities. The observation captured something important about how my story might influence their own approaches to risk-taking and achievement. Seeing someone they had underestimated accomplish something extraordinary could inspire them to reconsider their own limitations and assumptions. That would be the best possible outcome, I agreed. Not just that you see me differently, but that you see yourselves differently too. Success comes in many forms, and innovation often requires unconventional approaches. Natalie was still monitoring social media responses to the morning's interview, but now she looked up with a mixture of pride and amazement. Alex, people are calling you an inspiration, a role model for entrepreneurs who want to focus on building value rather than seeking publicity. You've become a symbol for a different approach to business success. The response was gratifying but also slightly overwhelming. I had built TechFlow to solve specific problems for specific clients, not to become a symbol or role model for broader cultural movements. But I recognized that extraordinary achievements inevitably carried responsibilities beyond their original intentions. I hope the story encourages other people to focus on substance over style, results over recognition, I said. If TechFlow's success inspires more entrepreneurs to prioritize value creation over publicity seeking, that would be a meaningful contribution to business culture. David stood up and walked over to where I was sitting, extending his hand in what felt like a formal acknowledgement of my achievements and a request to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Alex, I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry it took a national television interview for me to understand what you had accomplished. I stood and shook his hand, recognizing the gesture as an important step toward developing a healthier dynamic between us. Thank you, Dad, that means everything to me. Rebecca joined us, her expression combining remorse and admiration in equal measure. Alex, I promise to do better. To ask more questions, make fewer assumptions, and remember that success takes many different forms. The commitment represented exactly what I had hoped would emerge from the morning's revelations. Not just acknowledgement of my achievements, but recognition of the need to approach family relationships with more curiosity and less judgment. I appreciate that more than you know, I replied. Meaning it completely, Kevin and Natalie moved to join our impromptu family reconciliation, creating a moment that felt like a genuine turning point in our relationships. We're all proud of you, Alex, Kevin said. And we're excited to learn more about what you're building and how we can support your continued success. The offer of support was something I had longed for during the early years of TechFlow's development, when encouragement and understanding from family members would have made the challenges more manageable. While it was coming later than I had hoped, it was still meaningful and appreciated. Having your support and understanding will make a huge difference going forward, I said. Building something extraordinary is easier when you don't have to do it alone. As the immediate emotional intensity of the morning's revelations began to settle, practical considerations started to emerge. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages from business contacts, media outlets, and potential clients who had seen the Business Week interview and wanted to discuss opportunities or partnerships. I should probably head back to my apartment to handle some of these business calls, I said. Gesturing toward my phone. Going public with TechFlow's story is generating a lot of interest and requests for follow-up conversations. Rebecca looked at me with a mixture of respect and affection that I hadn't seen from her in years, of course. But Alex, before you go, I want you to know that you're always welcome here, not as someone who needs our guidance or approval, but as someone whose judgment and achievements we respect and admire. The statement represented a complete transformation in how she viewed my place in the family hierarchy. Instead of being the member who needed help and direction, I was now being acknowledged as someone whose success and insight might benefit others. Thank you, Rebecca. That means a great deal to me. David walked me to the door, his manner more respectful and considerate than it had been in recent memory. Alex, I'd like to learn more about TechFlow's work with Harrison Industries. Not to interfere or create complications, but because I'm genuinely interested in understanding how automation technologies might transform our operations. The request represented exactly the kind of engaged curiosity that I had wished for from family members throughout TechFlow's development. Instead of dismissing my work as incomprehensible technical stuff, he was showing genuine interest in understanding what I had built and how it created value. I'd be happy to discuss it with you, I replied. Professional partnerships work best when all parties understand the technologies and strategies involved. As I walked to my car, I reflected on how dramatically the morning had changed our family dynamics. 4 years of secrecy and misunderstanding had been replaced by acknowledgement and respect in the span of a single television interview. The basement apartment that had been my hiding place would soon be replaced by a home that reflected my actual success rather than my carefully crafted camouflage. But the most important change wasn't material. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely connected to my family, not as someone playing a role they had assigned me, but as someone they were curious to know and eager to support. The success of TechFlow had always been meaningful, but having family members who understood and appreciated what I had built made that success feel complete. My phone rang as I pulled into the parking lot of my basement apartment. The caller ID showed Eleanor Martinez, and I answered with genuine anticipation to hear her reaction to the morning's interview and its aftermath. Alex, I just watched your Business Week interview, she said, her voice carrying the warmth and pride of someone who had played a crucial role in enabling my success. I'm so proud of you, not just for what you've built with TechFlow, but for the courage to finally share your story with the world. Thank you, Eleanor. None of this would have been possible without your belief in my potential and your guidance during those critical early months. You had the vision and determination to build something extraordinary, she replied. I just provided some initial support and connections. What happens next is entirely up to you, and I have complete confidence that you'll continue to create value and inspire others through your work. As I ended the call and looked up at the modest building that had been my home during TechFlow's entire development, I realized that everything was about to change. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of transitioning from Denver's most secretive billionaire to someone whose success was public knowledge and whose story would inspire other entrepreneurs to prioritize substance over style. But today, I was simply someone who had finally been seen clearly by the people who mattered most to me, and that recognition was worth more than all the money TechFlow had generated. 6 months later, I stood in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor of Harrison Industries' downtown headquarters, looking out at Denver's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city where I had built my empire in secret. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now conducting business meetings in the same building where my father had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, never imagining that his supposedly underachieving son was creating something that would dwarf his employer's entire operation. Michael Harrison sat across from me at the polished mahogany conference table, his silver hair and authoritative presence commanding the kind of respect that came from decades of successful leadership in Denver's manufacturing sector. But today, he was the one seeking partnership, hoping to integrate TechFlow's automation solutions into his company's supply chain operations. The dynamic represented everything that had changed since that Sunday morning when my family discovered the truth about my business empire. Alex, the preliminary results from our pilot program have exceeded every expectation, Michael was saying, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered a competitive advantage that could transform his entire industry. Your automation platform has reduced our processing times by 43% while improving accuracy rates to levels we never thought possible. This isn't just incremental improvement, it's revolutionary change. David sat beside his CEO, taking notes with the focused attention of someone who understood that this meeting could define the trajectory of his own career within the company. The morning's revelations about TechFlow had elevated his status at Harrison Industries overnight, transforming him from a mid-level manager into someone whose family connections provided access to the most sought-after technology solutions in the manufacturing world. The results speak for themselves, I replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served me well throughout TechFlow's rapid expansion. But what excites me most is the potential for scaling these improvements across your entire operational network. We're not just talking about efficiency gains in individual processes, we're talking about transforming how your company approaches manufacturing fundamentals. Eleanor Martinez, who now served as TechFlow's Chief Strategy Officer, leaned forward to address the implementation timeline and resource requirements. Her presence at the meeting represented another layer of validation, demonstrating that our company had attracted executive talent from the highest levels of American business leadership. Our integration team has identified 12 additional processes within Harrison Industries that could benefit from similar automation solutions, she explained, consulting her tablet with the precision that had made her one of Denver's most respected business advisors. We're proposing a phased rollout that would allow you to see measurable results at each stage while building internal expertise to manage the new systems. Michael nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by the thoroughness and strategic thinking that TechFlow brought to every client engagement. This kind of comprehensive approach is exactly what we need to maintain our competitive position in an increasingly challenging market. Alex, your company doesn't just provide technology solutions, you provide business transformation. The meeting continued for another hour, covering technical specifications, implementation schedules, and performance metrics that would govern the expanded partnership between TechFlow and Harrison Industries. Every aspect of the discussion reinforced the professional credibility and operational excellence that had enabled my company's remarkable growth over the past 5 years. As we concluded the formal business discussions, Michael stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city, his expression thoughtful as he processed the implications of what TechFlow could accomplish for his company's future. David, you should be incredibly proud of your son, he said, turning back to address my father directly. Alex has built something truly extraordinary, and his willingness to partner with Harrison Industries could be the defining factor in our next decade of growth. David's face reflected a mixture of pride and amazement that had become familiar since the morning of my television interview. I'm still processing the magnitude of what Alex accomplished while we thought he was struggling to find direction. His success has taught our entire family to look deeper and ask better questions about each other's goals and capabilities. The acknowledgement represented genuine growth in our relationship, reflecting months of conversation and mutual effort to rebuild trust and understanding. David had become one of TechFlow's most effective advocates within Harrison Industries, not because of family loyalty, but because he genuinely understood and believed in the value we created for our clients. After the meeting concluded, and hands were shaken with promises of continued collaboration, David and I rode the elevator down to the parking garage in comfortable silence. The dynamic between us had evolved dramatically since that revelatory Sunday morning, transformed from barely concealed disappointment to mutual respect and genuine curiosity about each other's perspectives. Alex, I want you to know how much I appreciate the way you've handled this partnership with Harrison Industries, he said as we reached the garage level. You've maintained complete professionalism despite the family connections, and you've never made me feel like my position depended on our relationship rather than my own contributions. The observation highlighted something that had been important to me from the beginning of our business discussions. Professional relationships needed to be based on mutual value and performance rather than personal connections, even when those connections involved family members who worked for client companies. Business success requires clear boundaries and honest evaluation, I replied. Your value to Harrison Industries has nothing to do with being my father and everything to do with the expertise and dedication you bring to your responsibilities there. We reached our respective cars, mine now a sleek Tesla Model S that reflected my actual financial status rather than the deliberate camouflage I had maintained for so many years. The vehicle represented not just material success, but the freedom to express my authentic self without worrying about maintaining false impressions or managing other people's expectations. Rebecca wanted me to invite you to dinner this Sunday, David said as he prepared to leave. She's been experimenting with more sophisticated menus since learning about your business success, though she insists it has nothing to do with trying to impress you. I laughed at the gentle humor in his observation, recognizing how family dynamics had shifted in response to the revelation of my achievements. Rebecca had indeed upgraded her entertaining style, but more importantly, she had begun treating me as someone whose opinions and preferences mattered rather than someone who needed her guidance and direction. Tell her I'll be there, I said, and remind her that I'm still the same person who appreciates good food and family conversation, regardless of business success or financial status. The drive back to my new penthouse apartment took me through neighborhoods that held memories of my journey from struggling technology worker to billionaire entrepreneur. I passed the coffee shop where I had spent countless hours reading business books and developing TechFlow's initial concepts, the modest office building where we had established our first headquarters, and the community college where Rebecca had repeatedly suggested I should take business courses to improve my career prospects. Each landmark represented a different phase of the transformation that had brought me to this point, reminding me that success wasn't just about reaching a destination, but about maintaining perspective and gratitude for the experiences that had shaped the journey. The basement apartment where I had built my empire was now occupied by a young programmer who was probably dreaming of creating his own revolutionary technology company. My phone buzzed with a text message from Natalie, who had become one of TechFlow's most effective marketing consultants, despite her initial amazement at discovering my business success. Alex, the Forbes follow-up article just published, and it's generating incredible response from entrepreneurs who are inspired by your focus on substance over publicity. You've started a movement toward more meaningful definitions of business achievement. The message highlighted something that had emerged unexpectedly from my decision to share TechFlow's story with the world. Instead of simply generating attention for my company, the interview had sparked broader conversations about entrepreneurship, success, and the value of building something meaningful rather than just pursuing recognition and status. I had received hundreds of messages from aspiring entrepreneurs who were motivated by the idea that extraordinary achievement was possible without conventional credentials or public visibility. Young people who had been discouraged by their families' limited expectations were finding inspiration in a story that demonstrated how patient persistence and strategic thinking could overcome initial disadvantages. The broader impact was both humbling and energizing, suggesting that TechFlow's success could contribute to positive change that extended far beyond our own business operations. If my story encouraged more people to pursue innovation over publicity, substance over style, then the years of secrecy and sacrifice had generated value that transcended financial metrics. That evening, I sat on the terrace of my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights, while reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that Sunday morning when national television revealed the truth about my business empire. The material transformations were obvious and significant, but the most important changes involved relationships and self-understanding that couldn't be measured in dollars or market valuation. My family now saw me as someone whose judgment and achievements deserved respect, rather than someone who needed their advice and correction. Professional relationships were based on mutual value and strategic thinking, rather than assumptions about my capabilities or limitations. Most importantly, I had learned that authentic success required the courage to define achievement according to personal values rather than external expectations. TechFlow continued to grow and evolve, expanding into new markets and developing innovative solutions that helped companies achieve operational excellence while maintaining our commitment to discretion and professional service. The publicity had generated opportunities for partnerships and investments that would accelerate our impact across multiple industries, but the core mission remained unchanged, creating value through innovation rather than seeking recognition through publicity. Eleanor called as I was preparing for bed, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had played a crucial role in nurturing extraordinary achievement. Alex, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of everything you've accomplished, not just with TechFlow, but with your family relationships and your broader influence on entrepreneurial culture. Thank you, Eleanor. Your belief in my potential made all of this possible, and your continued guidance helps ensure that success doesn't compromise the values that created it. You've proven that the most powerful kind of achievement is the kind that emerges naturally from dedication to excellence rather than pursuit of attention, she replied. That lesson will inspire entrepreneurs for generations to come. As I ended the call and prepared to sleep in a home that reflected my actual success rather than carefully maintained camouflage, I realized that the most important achievement wasn't building a billion-dollar company or gaining recognition as a successful entrepreneur. The most important achievement was learning to be authentically myself while creating value for others, regardless of whether anyone was watching or keeping score. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as TechFlow continued to expand and evolve, but tonight I was simply grateful for the journey that had brought me from that basement apartment to this moment of clarity and connection. The story wasn't finished, but the foundation was solid, built on principles that could withstand success just as they had endured obscurity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.